title of our session is the Sebastian experience, of which I have very limited knowledge, mainly from a book edited by Professor Dai Jinhua and Professor Liu Jianzhi, probably more than a decade ago. But today we will have very good opportunity to hear from our three speakers to say how they share their most updated information and explanation about the Sebastian experience in the context of revolution and common. I think I want to save our interpreters some time, so I'll go bilingual. 现在我们开始我们今天的最后一场讨论。我们讨论的题目是墨西哥原住民萨帕塔经验，所以这个其实是继续了我们上午和刚才的讨论，在一个关于革命和大同的背景下，现在我们有一个比较非常确定的像一个实例研究，因为我们此前的讨论比较理论化，有比较大的这种社会历史的背景，现在我们有一个非常好的实例。我们今天有3位发言人，我们就依照我们在这个 program 上的顺序来走。So we'll go with the order in our program, and Professor Gilberto Lopez RIVAS will be our first speaker. Actually, he already talked about the Sebastian in his earlier presentations, and this is another opportunity for us to probably have more interactive kind of format of discussion with him, but we will give him first 15 minutes, and my major responsibility is to make sure he won't run over time.
I would like to excuse myself because I didn't participate in the last session. I was out. But I would like to express in referring the Zapatistas that fortunately for the humanity, revolution and changes, radical changes, do not ask permission to the intellectuals and academics like us to occur. And because that as part of this class society in which we live, that the people revolt. The people, when they do not tolerate a situation, they revolt. And even they can make revolution. So I remember in the younger days in which we were militants of guerrilla movements, or in our countries after the Cuban Revolution of 1959, the discussions we have about the traditional and classic Marxist terms of the objective and subjective conditions of revolution, and all the endless discussions about and debates about this to be applied in our countries. So we never discussed the idea that the revolution was not possible. The discussion was how to start a revolution. And well, David pointed out his ideas that I am most in favor of many of them, but I think that even in the urban areas like here or in many other urban areas of our countries, there are the possibilities of building communities or building community lives and projects that we have a friend and a colleague, Raul Sivecki, who has been studying Zapatistas and other movements in Brazil, in all Latin America, especially regarding these spaces in these territories in the urban areas in which the people organize themselves to have to be this autonomous subject, or that David mentioned it as the new revolutionary subject. So in this aspect, I have a kind of a small confrontation with David. I think that we can organize change, radical change in many of the most terrible conditions in which the human beings can live. All depends in the context and in the situation, the special and particular conditions in which the people lives, that the change and the movement to make a radical transformation can be done. Well, saying that, I put the example of the Zapatistas. There is in Mexico a conservative writer of the liberal intellectuals branch of that we have. He's called Jorge Castañeda, and he wrote a book before the rebellion of the Zapatistas that was called The End of the Armed Utopian. Is that correct?
Utopia disarmed.
Yes, the utopian disarmed. And the book was confronted, as I said before, with the rebellion Zapatista in 1994. And those ideas, particularly at the end of the Soviet Union and the socialist European countries, spread over the world. And the Zapatistas was the negation, in reality, of all those ideas. The Zapatistas didn't ask permission to meetings like this to revolt. They revolt. And they bring to us that utopia that means nowhere, take place in that place. So, to begin with the Zapatistas, I think that the Zapatistas represent the first armed rebellion against transnational neoliberal globalization. They made the people all over the world and say, forget about what the ideologies and intellectuals of the liberal field are saying about changing radically. And they bring us the utopia, especially in Mexico. And it was not casualidad.
Chance.
It was not a chance that they rebel in the 1st of January of 1994. That was the day in which the treaty between Canada, Mexico, and the United States began. That was the free trade treaty. That was that had terrible effects in the Mexican economy, in the peasants, and in the factories we have, in all the organization previous to this agreement. And also this agreement includes secrets alliance in the field of police, intelligence, security that they don't say to the Mexican people. But well, so to begin with, the Zapatistas represent this protest against this treaty and about the laws regarding property of the land. It was one of the motives of this revolt was land and the way the land was distributed in Mexico after the Mexican Revolution of 1910-1917. That was also an armed revolution that cost the country 1 million of debt when the country has 60 million of inhabitants. So the Zapatistas revolt against this law that are called in Mexico structural reforms. Structural reforms that mean that they put the land that belongs to the indigenous community and the peasant community to sell. That was the form of property that was ejidos and communal lands. So that was one of the main conquests of the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So what this transnational group did was to privatize they pretend to privatize the land of the communities, of the peasants and indigenous communities. So this rebellion of the Zapatistas was, and I repeat, the first revolt against neoliberal forms of domination and exploitation. But also, this rebellion brings something very it was a necessity or a need, an historical need in Mexico, in which the corruption of the government and the divorce between government and peoples are so big. So the Zapatistas bring something new, even for what we call the institutional left. That means the people who believe that changes could be done by go into election, the electoral game, and that was expressed in one word: dignity. To recover dignity. And dignity means a lot of things for the Zapatistas. Means to honor the work of the revolutionaries, of the people who are in the movement, to honor the honesty, and something completely new for this institutional left. They have a motto, the Zapatistas have a motto. I am not going to translate well, but it says for everybody, all. For us, nothing. I don't know if I translate well in English, but what that means in the political arena of the revolutionary causes of Latin America, that despite the failure of real socialists and despite the failure of this institutional left of bringing deeply change in Mexico, the Zapatistas revolt not to take the power for themselves, but to build a completely inedited form of power of the people in the territories they have the hegemony. And that is completely something new in the even in the guerrilla history of Latin America. And that's why they broke completely any relation with the idea of the vanguard, the idea of this chosen group of revolutionaries that know how to do everything and that teach the others how to do things, and that with the time they convert in the leaders of the cause. So this is another characteristics of the Zapatistas. And I think that just to have, in 2 minutes, just to have pride, honor to the true, dignity, not to be vanguard, a new utopian, is enough to be one of the most peculiar movements of our time. And also, well, I don't have time, but what David exposed is very important. The movements do not choose violence for a pleasure. They choose violence for necessity. And well, the Zapatistas use violence. And that doesn't matter to me. As I was part of armed groups, and it doesn't matter. I am not a pacifist in the class struggle. There is a certain responsibility when an armed decision is taken to avoid a blood and to avoid the killing of young people. The revolutionaries never choose violence as a method. We are now in the trap, in la trampa. We have followed in the trick of imperialist ideology that the revolutionary violence is terrorism. I will talk tomorrow about what terrorism is from the point of view of the imperialist terror, but just as a matter of principle, the revolutionary violence, that of the people in the revolutions, in the Cuban Revolution, in the Sandinista Revolution, in the Mexican Revolution, that was the violence of the people. It was what Lenin considered a just war, the war of the exploited and oppressed people against their oppressors. So I am not ashamed of that violence. I am proud of that violence. That violence was used against Germany, the fascist Germany, And the partisans and the guerrilla who fought the Germans used violence. And that was a good violence for me, at least. Thank you very much.
I guess I would really like to know what you would like to know. I think that the one thing I would like to emphasize about the Zapatista revolution is that it's not unique. The history of the Latin America is a history of revolution. The history goes back 2 centuries at least. Or at least it goes back 2 centuries of the written history. One of the things we know about history is that history is always written by the winners. It turns out that the battles in Latin America, in what we know as Latin America today, in the 15th century, were very exciting, interesting battles in which the native peoples of the Americas won. It's not true that the Spanish just conquered Mexico or Peru or Central America at one fell swoop, the way in which the stories are told. It took the Spanish decades to conquer Latin America. And I think that that's very important. Latin American population was annihilated by the Spanish conquest, but not because the Spanish were very good at warfare, but because they brought smallpox. Smallpox translates, you know what smallpox is? Smallpox killed a very, very large portion of the population. I could also talk about, and perhaps I should, the extraordinary important contribution that Latin America made to the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Marx didn't write about that. Primitive accumulation did not end with the enclosures in the United Kingdom. The sugar plantations and the cotton plantations in the Western Hemisphere financed the Industrial Revolution. When you're studying today what revolution is, when you're studying the possibilities of social change, it seems to me very important to ask the question, who is financing social change? How does it happen? The Zapatista rebellion that Gilberto just talked about was known to the world on January 1st, 1994, but it started 10 years earlier. And it started 10 years earlier in part by the beginnings of an organization of indigenous peoples in the mountains of Chiapas. But they were joined by groups of students from universities, students and teachers from universities, including my university. The man that became very famous, known as Subcomandante Marcos, was a teacher at my university. He was a teacher of humanities. That's sort of like cultural studies. But what is the history of revolution in Latin America? In 1952, Bolivia had, I'm just talking about the second half of the 20th century, after the Mexican Revolution, which was the first armed revolution of the 20th century. Gilberto mentioned, perhaps you didn't register it. I'm going to repeat it. During the Mexican Revolution, 1 million people were killed. 1 million people were killed. The total population of Mexico at that time was 16 million people. Not 60, 16 million people. Everyone lost a relative in that revolution. And it's extraordinarily important to remember. It's extraordinarily important because the Mexican people remember that. And the Mexican ruling class forgets it. Many members of today's Mexican ruling class didn't even have relatives in Mexico at the beginning of the 20th century. They were immigrants later on. And so it's important to understand that the Mexican Revolution has deep roots in a hatred for today's Mexican ruling class. And it's no accident that Mexico right now is perhaps one of the most, if not the most violent country on the face of the earth. There are more people killed today in Mexico than are dying in Yemen. There are more people killed in Mexico today than are dying in Iraq, Afghanistan. And you don't even know that there's a war going on there. In 1952, in Bolivia, there was a revolution and a land reform. And then the United States sent in its diplomatic forces and ended that effort. In 1954, the people of Guatemala elected democratically a progressive president, and the United States sent in Marines. In 1959, the 26th of July movement took power in Cuba. And the United States tried to send in troops to the Bay of Pigs, it was called. And the Cuban people were able to defeat the United States forces. In 1970, the Unidad Popular won the elections freely in Chile in an extraordinarily democratic election. And the United States, through one of its big corporations called the International Telephone and Telegraph Company, ITT, financed a coup d'etat, a golpe de Estado, and killed tens of thousands of Chileans. But I want to stop on the Chilean thing for a moment, because after the 1973 golpe de Estado, coup d'etat, or whatever you want to call it, the German government collaborated with the Chilean dictatorship to put tens of thousands of Chileans in a concentration camp, much like what Hitler did during World War II. And only 2 years ago did the German government ask for apology to the Chilean government. In 1979, in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas ended a long struggle and took power against a family dictatorship. Gilberto had something to do with that. He can talk about that. We could go on, because the president of the National Rifle Association of the United States spent the next 10 years financing counter-guerrilla operations using drug money. Let me repeat that. Using money from the international trade in heroin and cocaine to finance the counter-revolution in other countries in Central America. The man who today is head of the National Rifle Association in the United States. 1989, Hugo Chavez began what is an exciting and extraordinarily troubling history in Venezuela. And the United States government and other Latin American governments are trying to impoverish the Venezuelan people today. And I'm just mentioning Latin America. I'm not talking about the murder of Gaddafi in Libya, or the South African defeat by the Angolan people. I could go on and on. Revolution is the history of world capitalism. We have to understand, yes, capitalism is very violent, but people are not passive. The Sandinista revolution is interesting and exciting because after a very, very short 6-day battle, the Sandinista revolution is trying to be a peaceful revolution. And that perhaps is the most exciting legacy of the Sandinista, I'm sorry, not the Sandinista, the Zapatista revolution. The Zapatista revolution is trying to be peaceful. But today, in Zapatista territory, it is surrounded by military forces that are paid for by the United States and by Israel. The story, the fairy tale we heard yesterday about the kibbutz is a fairy tale. I was not as angry as I should have been against our speaker yesterday. I will end by saying, therefore, the building, as I was talking about this morning or earlier today, of communitarian revolutionary actors is a history now of a new wave that is represented by the World Social Forum, by the Global University, I hope. They're busy talking about something else. The history of revolutionary change in the present era will depend upon communities being able to carve out and govern their territories in the same way the Zapatistas have. And hopefully they will be able to do so without a military force on their borders. If there's one lesson I, as an individual, and I think Gilberto would join me to say, is yes, the Zapatistas have provided an extraordinary lesson. A lesson that perhaps the most important tool for revolutionary change in the current world is not what the communities themselves do, but their ability to muster world support, national political support, international support for what they're doing. Revolution in the 21st century will not take place only by guns, but by international political solidarity and international economic alliances. Thank you very much.
在两位来自墨西哥而且来自萨巴提斯塔前线的那个老师哈讲过以后，其实我真的应该没什么话可说了哈。但是那个在我们这样一个论坛和面对这么多年轻的面孔，我就多说一点。我记得2006年这本书2006年出版哈，然后是我和我的学生们一起这个翻译并且撰写的一个关于 Zapatista 研究的论文集，然后刘老师那个帮我们选篇目，并且校对了所有的这个文字哈。我比较骄傲的就是以我的破英语哈，书里面大半本是我翻的，而且我给他写了这个几万字的序言。我印象非常清楚，就是乡建运动的第一批参与者是这篇序言的最早的读者，就是写完了以后就发给他们。很多朋友告诉我说，那个他们连夜读它，告诉我他们读到2点或者3点，那么也算是一个时刻哈，一个历史性的时刻，这样的一个我们本土的另类实验的运动和来自拉丁美洲的反抗的消息，在那个时刻相遇。
We have two prominent speakers from the Latin America, actually, who involved actively into the Zapatista and other liberation movement in Latin America. Actually, I have need to add on this issue. So I just want to talk about my involvement into the studies of Zapatista. So Professor Dai actually she is the editor, and actually she is the major translator of this writing of the Subcommandant Marcos' writings. And actually, this is the result of a course of cultural study in her department, studying the experience of the Zapatista revolution. And what is remarkable is that the very first participant of the rural reconstruction movement actually were among the very first reader of the preface of this book, when Professor Stein completed the preface. So they remember how they are so excited when reading this the preface and the book, and they spend night just reading the everything, and how much they were inspired by the experience and by the revolution of the Zapatista movement. And I may say this is one of the remarkable historical moments when social movements from different continentals actually met in one single point. And this is this book about Zapatista movement.
我完全同意刚才两位老师所介绍的这个 Zapatista 的历史和拉丁美洲革命的历史。
I completely agree with what two teachers from Latin America are telling us about the history and the background of the Zapatista revolution, which actually is the history of Latin America's century-long revolution experience.
我当然完全同意Professor BARKIN 所说的这不是一场特殊的革命，但是我接下来想补充说，这真的是一场特殊的革命。
And I agree with Professor BARKIN that Zapatista is not a particular revolution. It's just one of the many revolutions in the continent. But I got to say, Zapatista revolution is actually a really peculiar, remarkable, and particular revolution.
在我看起来，它标志了一个非常重要的历史时刻。
And to me, it marks a very important historical moment.
1994年的，应该说是1993年的那个最后一天的午夜，也就是1994年元旦。一支武装的农民原住民部队进入到了 San Cristobal Chiapas 的这个首府。
So, on the last day of the 1993 and on the first day of the year 1994, a group of Aboriginal soldiers, you may say, enter into the capital of the regions of Zapatista.
我读到的回忆文章说，他们都是在那天清晨的时候被朋友叫醒，说你开电视。他们在电视上看到了一个他们以为属于70年代的画面。
In many memorials, in many, I read the story that actually on that day, they were called by a friend through telephone maybe, and to turn on the television, and they watched these scenes which they believed could only happen in the 1970s.
那个没有军装的这个农民的这个军队，1/3的人拿的是木头枪。
So an army of peasants without uniform, without military uniform, and were holding. Actually, 1/3 of them were just armed with a stroke of a wooden stick.
那么在全世界眼中，我在我感觉当中，这是冷战的失败者再一次站出来发表了一个宣言。这个宣言的内容是，受够了，或者是还没完。
So for me, it is a manifesto. It's a manifesto of the loser of the Cold War, who stood up once again to tell the world that we are not done yet. We are still fighting on.
而几天以后，这个反抗的起义的画面，变成了后冷战时代的一个全新的反抗的开始。
And a few days later, as this sense of uprising becomes the iconic sense of revolution in the post-Cold War era.
它是一个再一次的绝望的原住民的武装斗争，但它同时它事实上成了第一场符号学游击战。
This is the first guerrilla war of those desperate peasants, but it's also become the very first symbolic and semiotic war in our cultural reproduction.
我第一次把 Subcommander Marcos 的照片展示给我丈夫看的时候，他指出的第一个问题是他背的子弹和他用的枪是不配套的。
When I showed the picture of the Commander Marcos picture to my husband, his very first comment on it is, according to the picture, the gun and the bullet he was armed actually did not match together.
因为在这里那个枪和子弹都是符号，是武装斗争的符号。
But for him or for Professor Dai, the gun he carried and the bullet he carried actually are just symbol, are just icons of their resistance.
武装斗争。
The icon and the symbol of their armed resistance, armed struggle.
而这场战争是一场语言的战争，是一场故事的战争。
And this is also a war of language. It is also a war of storytelling.
是一个武装斗争的原住民的形象去征服世界的过程。
This is also This is also it is also a war in which the image of the armed struggle of persons conquer the world.
而对我来说，到今天为止啊，刚才大家问还有没有后续哈？实在不好意思，其实第二卷与第一卷同时编完，但是因为我的一个极端难产的前言，拖延至今。
So somebody asked me whether there's the second volume of this book. I'm ashamed to tell you that actually volume 2 has already been ready together with volume 1, but because I'm too lazy to complete the first the preface of the second volume, so it's yet to be published.
我说到今天为止，我认为 Zapatista 运动仍然是对我们这些聚在一起的人是一个非常重要的启示。
And for me, Zapatista revolution is still a source, one of the greatest source of inspiration for us who are gathering here.
因为它是充分的本土的，那个原住民的社群的，但它同时是世界的。
Because it is completely local, communitarian, aboriginal. But at the same time, it is global. It belongs to the world.
这场运动在告诉我们说，我们每一个在本土尝试着另类尝试的人，另类试验的人，应该知道我们跟世界上所发生的一切事情的联系是什么。
It tells us who are localized, who are struggling to find an alternative solution to our local problems. It reminds us that what that is mean to be, but it is important to find connection between local and global.
所以它是一场原住民运动，是一场游击战，但它也是反全球化的第一枪。
So, is this Aboriginal guerrilla war? But at the same time, it's also the first gunshot of the anti
反全球化的第一枪。
This is the first shotguns against the globalization.
同时他也启示我们说，他也启发我们，传统和现代，或者说这个我们内部的文化，我们自己的文化和世界的知识。
I'm sorry. It is the first gunshot against the globalization. It's also remind us.
就是本地的文化和世界的知识。
It's also reminds us how to try to relate our local knowledge with the knowledge of the world.
Subcommander Marcos 或者 Subcommander Galliano，对我们的一个启示是我们这些人，我们这些念过一点书的外来人和在地的那个农民。边缘人主体之间究竟应该是一种什么样的关系
？So the inspiration we can get from Subcommander Marcos and Subcommander Galliano is what is the relation or the connection between us as a kind of intellectual with those Aboriginal marginalized people in the world, in the other parts of the world.
也许在座的朋友会知道哈，就是1天前离开的滕威教授做了一个微信公众号，叫海螺社区，名字来自于 Zapatista 社区。
Professor Teng Wei, who left one day before, actually, she organized an internet community, which is called the Community of Calico. Actually. Which is inspired by the Zapatista movement.
也是在 Zapatista 的海螺社区当中 ，Marcos 明确地表达了他的观念，就是叫做通过服从来管制。
So in the communitarian experience, Subcommander Marcos made it clear that they will rule by submission.
那么1983年，他作为一个年轻的设计与符号学系的这个青年教授，然后深入到萨巴蒂萨社区。据他自己的描述，他那个时候大概就是一个毛派游击队。
So, in 1984, Subcommander Marcos moved into the Zapatista community. At that time. According to his own description, he was a kind of Maoist guerrilla that is potential.
他们以为他们要启蒙和发动苦难的人民，最后发现他们的一无所知，使他们必须学习。
So at the beginning, he think that it was his duty to enlighten, to mobilize the people in the community. But at the end, he discovered how innocent. How ignorant he actually was. So for him, actually, it was become a learning process to learn from these Aboriginal people.
如果 CIA 的材料是准确的，那么他比我大1岁。
If this material actually is correct, then Marcos actually is 1 year older than me.
从1983年到今天。
So from 1983 till today.
1982年，我成为一个大学的教师，到今天。
On the year 1982, I become a university teacher, and till today.
每一次想到这个数字的时候，我会觉得像我这样的人没有任何理由表示绝望。
So when I think about this number, this year. And I remind myself, a person like us is not qualified to be hopeless.
而我从Marcos 的写作，从 Zapatista 运动学到的另外一个非常重要的和对我来说特别有用的方式或者是知识，就是拒绝悲情。
So one of the most important knowledge or inspiration I learned from the Zapatista revolution is we should fight against is hopeless. We should fight against this desperation.
用他的3句话结束我的发言。
So I want to end my my work. I want to end our presentation with 3 quotations from Marcos.
他说：“当我们聚在一起，当笑声像暴雨一样的从天上落下来的时候，你们说谁会赢？”
So when we are gathered together, and when we make laughter, that is like a thunder showering on the earth, and you tell me who are going to be the final winner.
另外一句话是说，告别灰色，世界正蓝得像个橘子。
So the second quotation is, well, bidding farewell to the grayness. The world is like a blue orange.
第3句话是说，原住民的孩子没有太大的梦想，他们只是梦想天和地换个个儿。他说，他就梦想能够抬起头来看看海。
For the Aboriginal children, they don't have big dream. Their dream is being. They want the heaven and the earth turned upside down. You know. Okay, and when they raise their heads, they can see the ocean.
Thank you.